I'm Dennis Anderson, and here's what's coming up on Almanac North. George Floyd's death while in police custody in Minneapolis has spurred protests around the country and here in Duluth. Could this be a turning point in race relations in our country? We will talk with Duluth Human Rights Officer Carl Crawford. And we will hear from State Representative Liz Olson about legislative measures that she supports in response to George Floyd's killing. It's all coming your way next on Almanac North. Hello once again, everyone, and welcome to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. Julie Zenner is off this week as we alternate hosting duties during the pandemic. This week's show was recorded on Thursday afternoon and includes a pre-recorded interview. Well, it's been nearly 2 weeks since George Floyd was killed while in police custody down in Minneapolis. Autopsies have confirmed his death was a homicide, and now all 4 of the fired police officers involved in the incident have been charged by the state attorney general. Protests and rioting have been ongoing after this latest killing of an unarmed black man. In Duluth, protesters gathered last weekend at the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial, which remembers the lynching of 3 young black men falsely accused of rape 100 years ago. People of all races seem to be rising up to say enough is enough. Joining us with his thoughts on what is happening is Carl Crawford. Carl, of course, is the City of Duluth's Human Rights Officer. Welcome, Carl. Thanks for being on the program tonight. Carl, a lot of people are saying this just feels like a turning point in our country. Would you agree with that statement?
I would definitely agree with that statement. You know, we got 4, but we need a lot more work to be done.
And so, if this is a turning point, I suspect we're going to be hearing about this for a while yet. This isn't over.
Absolutely, and I'm so happy to be here having this conversation with you at this time. And first, want to give condolences to George Floyd's family and know that this has been happening for a very long time in America and is well overdue. Mm-hmm. And the community and the nation is standing up and saying enough.
Carl, you're the Human Rights Officer for the City of Duluth. What is that job? What does that entail? What do you do for a living?
Well, it entails that racism and discrimination does not find a home here in Duluth, Minnesota, whether it's in employment or housing or in healthcare, and most importantly, in public safety.
Mm-hmm. So to be hired in that position, obviously there have been issues that needed attention.
Absolutely, and there's been issues here for a long time. As you see, right now we sit almost on the eve of the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial and the commemorates of the 100 year of that horrible event in our community.
What was your immediate reaction when you heard of Mr. Floyd's killing?
Deep sadness, because I saw myself in Mr. Floyd, and I saw my son and other men of color helplessly there in the street being murdered.
So how do you think then Duluth is reacting to this tragedy?
I think Duluth is reacting the way the rest of the country is, with outrage, with their hearts wide open, and with sympathy for the Floyd's family, but more importantly with anger and frustration that the system needs an overhaul, that this has been happening far too long with many deaths. You know, on that weekend, Minnesota's been known for the land of 10,000 lakes, and it turned into a land of a million tears.
Did all of the protests around the country surprise you?
No, not at all.
How about the violence?
The violence and the protests are 2 separate issues.
They are 2 different issues.
Without a doubt. And I try my best not to understand how someone is going to express their pain that they're feeling right now. Yeah. But we know that it has been 2 separate issues, and there's been a really lot of amazing peaceful marches, even under the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah. People have gathered and people have found ways to find peace and try and really work through this.
I'm sure there are a lot of viewers watching this program tonight, Carl, who are wondering, how in the world can we heal from this? Any suggestions?
Patience, time, an opportunity to really listen, and it's time to roll up our sleeves and get to work and start to see each other as human beings.
I can see an argument in that statement. Couldn't some people say, wait a minute, we've been waiting, we've got patience, we've been waiting for years and decades?
Not that kind of patience, but patience to allow the opportunity for community to grieve. We don't want this to be over so fast that we miss the opportunity for people to really have a chance to grieve and to really have a chance to build trust back in police, back into our normal everyday way of life. And that's going to take time.
Carl, from what you're hearing in Duluth and the Northland, are we grieving? Have we started to grieve yet?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
So another good question, I think, would be, so how can we move forward and heal? First of all, you say we have to start grieving, and we have started. Is there more to it than that?
It is, and I think most importantly, we have to admit that there is a problem with the way Black and brown people have been in contact with police and the legal system as a whole. We all have our opinions, but we cannot argue the data and the facts that continue to show that there is huge gaps in the way we are all treated, and we're not all treated fairly.
Whenever I've been pulled over for very minor indiscretions, like a burned out headlight on my head, I get a little apprehensive when I'm pulled over, a little nervous about being pulled over. As a Black man, are you nervous about getting pulled over? Do you get scared?
I have a lot of fear when I'm pulled over, because for me, Mr. Anderson, it's a life or death situation, and I know that. I know that from the history of African American men in this country, that I might not leave that situation alive.
Even here in Duluth?
I can't pick a state, a county or region that I don't have that fear.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you will ever get over that?
No. I think there's hope, and that's why I do the work that I do, and that's why I'm here in this community, because I believe there is hope, and there are a lot of really great officers and really great people doing great work. But we got to do better. We can't just have every other, it has to be every one.
More and more officers of other races than white are now being hired by police departments. What kind of racial anti-bias training is going on in police departments today? And is that happening here in the Twin Cities, or Twin Ports?
Duluth has a very robust training. I know Superior does as well. But it goes more than just hiring officers of color. You have to challenge the culture within that department. And that's what we're seeing right now in Minneapolis, is the culture allows certain things to happen. And that is part of the thing that needs to change. It's very hard systemically to make change.
So what kind of conversations should we be having in our homes with our children and perhaps other adults in our homes? What kind of conversations do we need to have?
I think one of the most important things is to understand what your bias is. It's something we all have. I have them and you have them.
We all have a bias.
But it's an opportunity for us to sit down, even under this pandemic, with our family, and really have those deep conversations, the ones that we've been avoiding for so long, about what is bias, why do we look at people differently, and most importantly, do we recognize that we treat different people differently, whether it's by race, by gender, by sexual orientation? Why do we do those things? And then we have to come up with a plan to challenge to change them.
So a question I have would be, does the Duluth Police Department, maybe other police departments in this immediate area, do we have bias training here?
Yes, we do. We do have bias training.
How does that work? How does that work?
It's a series of conversations, but you cannot break down, in my estimation, the human touch, the opportunity to really know people inside and outside of work. And when we build communities and we have opportunities where people cross-culturally have meaningful conversations, not to change each other, but to understand who we are, that's when we win.
That's an interesting point, to understand who we are.
Yes.
Yeah, wow. Is bias training working?
Not all the time.
It's my understanding the police officers in the Twin Cities have had bias training. So they did hear about these things.
Yes, but training is no exception for the real thing. When it's real and you're right in front of that situation, I often talk about bias. When that elevator door opens and your bias is right there, what do you do? What do you do in that moment? And this happens so quickly that if we're not aware of what our own bias is and we haven't first accepted it's a problem, we cannot change it.
The Duluth chapter of the NAACP sent out a statement. What did they say?
They said that they recognize the death of George Floyd was 100% avoidable. And we are definitely mourning the death of Mr. Floyd, but we also are demanding for change and demanding that we do that through peaceful marches, but more important, through protests. And when people protest, it doesn't mean that they do it the way that we want it to be done. It has to be the way that that group needs to have it done. And sometimes that's tears and sometimes it's anger. But most importantly, we need to separate the looting from the other part of it.
Yes.
And then we know that there's two different stories there.
Yes, there are. Yeah.
But again, I can't represent or speak about how other people deal with grief.
So the NAACP, with that statement, it's early on yet, but have they made some ground? Have they covered some good ground with this?
I think so. The NAACP has been doing great work in our community for many years, and right now they've really stepped up and have really created opportunities for protests and ways for folks to come together.
Yeah.
You know, they've given away masks during the COVID-19 pandemic and still create opportunities for people to voice and be heard. And that's what's difficult in our community and many communities across the country, is that lonely voice that doesn't get heard until it's in a group.
So in our country, what comes next?
Wow, I think you're going to see, in my estimation, a lot more groups like our Citizen Review Board throughout the country that are going to be working alongside alongside police departments to make sure that community has a voice in the table at the work that they're doing.
What can be done, or is it already being done, in the public schools to fight racism?
There is some dialogue.
Are we way behind?
We're extremely behind. And we have to ask ourselves, too, our schools have a certain role in our lives, but you and I as parents, we also have a role in how our kids enter in and out that conversation about race. And if we don't make the time to have that conversation, guess what? Sometimes they do as we do, and they definitely hear as we say. So we have to make it a point at the dinner table, at the dining room table, at the church table, at the work table, and at school to have these dialogues about race and bias and really hold up a mirror image to what it is we're doing and how we can change things in our community.
So have we invited and brought in, maybe even hired individuals to help us do that?
Yes, and we have some folks doing really great work. But again, it comes down to relationships. If you and I never had the opportunity to sit across from each other, we would just have our own bias and opinions as we walked by. And we have to create that opportunity for us to get to know each other.
Sounds like what we're really trying to do is trying to get rid of use of force.
And trying to build a beloved community.
We're on the way, Carl.
I sure hope so.
So do I. Thank you for being here. Carl Crawford, tremendous opportunity tonight to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend.
Bet. The Minnesota Legislature could go into a special session as soon as next week, depending on the call of Governor Tim Walz. The session was originally to deal with unfinished business in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. But now, criminal justice reform will also be high on the agenda if a special session is called. Producer Greg Grell talked with Representative Liz Olson on the legislative reaction to the Minneapolis police killing.
What a terrible tragedy. George Floyd should still be alive. We all, 2 weeks ago saw a video that I think shook us all to our core. And we saw a black man killed at the hands of police. We know that a camera was rolling that time, but we also know that it happens far more often than most of us know about. And so it really, I think, hit a chord for so many people who've lived this experience for years and years and years, and really put a call to action out that this has to stop, that enough is enough. And to have this happen, whether it doesn't matter where or what police department, that we know this exists across our nation. And so this is a long history of unjust behavior and systematic racism and white supremacy that have really come to a head, I think, and we're seeing that with the way people are rising up, that the years of pain and hurt and anger are really showcasing in the way people are coming together in the streets and on social media and other places to organize their voices loudly to ask for change, to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And we've obviously seen that in Minnesota, and it's been a real call to action for me personally as a legislator. What can I do in this moment?
And of course, we've had moments like this in our past, but there does seem to be something different about this. Like, this might be a real turning point. Do you feel that as well?
I definitely do. I mean, I think that we're seeing the scale of just the way this is, we're 2 weeks in, and where there's people still, on the Capitol grounds. We have National Guard surrounding our state capitol. The first time we've had to have something like this happen in our history as a state. So I do think it's time. And I think the fact that it happened on top of a pandemic, where so many of the injustices of our society were being laid bare there. And then we had this happen as well, that it's really, there is no going back. If we're going to rebuild our state after a pandemic, after a killing of a Black man, we need to do it in a more just way than we've ever seen before. So I think this is a time for us to reconcile our history and our future, and is a time for us as Minnesotans to really be on the right side of things. So I do believe it's a tipping point, and I'm hopeful that good comes of this. And I think that's why so many people are being relentless in their lifting up of their voice to make sure we don't go back to normal.
Now, you just recently attended a news conference in St. Paul's Rondo neighborhood, a historically Black neighborhood, to announce some new legislation, or at least efforts to introduce new legislation. First off, what were the emotions like? That had to have been quite a moment.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing our DFL House Caucus and the Senate DFL have been really conscious of in this moment is to lift up the voices of those most impacted, which are our Black legislators, our legislators of color, our Indigenous legislators, to make sure that they're leading in this moment. And so yesterday was really a show of that, where we were in the neighborhood of Rena Moran, Chair Moran, African-American woman, who kicked off the press conference, and it was all led by people of color, Indigenous voices, primarily our Black legislators. So it was a really powerful moment for all of us to come together around solutions, but around the pain and the hurt that so many of not only our legislators feel, but the communities they represent. And so it was a really powerful and emotional moment. And it was also, we were there for action. Our job as legislators is to come up with the solutions we can enact at the state level. So as a white legislator from greater Minnesota, it was good to be there and stand behind my colleagues and to really stand there and to lift up their voices and their solutions.
Now, speaking of northern Minnesota and your district, what have you heard from your constituents and the people that you've been listening to in our region since all of this has happened?
Yeah, great question. I mean, that's really ultimately my job, is to be the voice of my constituents, the 40,000 people I represent. And I've heard loud and clear, a voice like, our community cares about one another. And just even on my walk today, I walked by several, homes in the Denfeld neighborhood that had visible signs of solidarity with what's happening, whether it's justice for George Floyd or it was a Black Lives Matter sign. I could see that visibly in my community. And people have emailed. I've never had so many constituent contacts, which if you're a constituent listening and you're not hearing back right away, my voicemail got it shut down over the weekend. I had so many calls. So we're trying to get through everything and sift out who is constituents and who is not, maybe calling from other states even. But, I've heard loud and clear that our communities care about one another, and that means everybody. And so whether, we're predominantly white city, but we still have like major injustices here. And we have communities of color within my neighborhood that are feeling the pain, the anger, and we have people that aren't, part of the communities of color that want to be in solidarity and want to be allies and are really raising up their voices. So I've heard a lot from my constituents about this issue and really want accountability and want to make sure that we're enacting state level solutions to this issue.
And speaking of state level solutions, what do you hope and think the legislature can do? How can the legislature be part of the solution to this ongoing issue?
Absolutely. There are, and this was probably touched on, a little bit from what we were talking about with what was unveiled yesterday. So our People of Color and Indigenous Caucus around, as well as myself and other legislators, our Speaker of the House, we stood behind a set of reforms that were a package of legislation that we believe would really bring justice to George Floyd and would really help the solution. And they include a variety of things coming from reform the investigation and prosecution of officer-involved deaths and wrongdoing situations. So we have a number of things that we could envision being enacted into law that would help that part. We increase accountability around police and transparency. There's a number of things we could do around that specific topic regarding this. We could raise the conduct standards for officers and have more excellence, diversity, training, peer-to-peer support for those that go through these situations. So it's not about leaving police officers high and dry. It's actually giving tools and accountability and support to be able to implement a lot of the change we want to see. It's about officers partnering with the communities they serve and building those relationships. And I think in Duluth, we're a little bit better at that than perhaps other police departments have been, and that we're, talking about what it's going to take to repair and rebuild community in a variety of ways that we've seen impacted in this way. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. And there's a number of ways that we can do it, but we have a set of legislation we're putting forward, some of which we've already voted on, that has been passed in the House side of things, and others which will be new in response to this. And a number of these too, I should mention, the Department of Public Safety and the Attorney General had a special task force that met over the last year that came up with a number of solutions, and that was with all the stakeholders at the table. And so a number of these aren't just coming out of thin air. They've really been talked about and vetted with a broad stakeholder group too.
Now, as far as when this might happen, there is a special session presumably that will be occurring. Do you see some of these issues now coming to the forefront for perhaps action as soon as this summer?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our Speaker of the House, Melissa Hortman, has said so much that, any special session would involve a response to this. It's unclear. We obviously have a divided government, and we have a DFL-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate. And I don't know what that looks like from the Republican Senate, but we clearly have our package that we've put out, and, whether some of that can get across the finish line in a divided government or some may take some time to work out remains to be seen. But that is definitely why I believe, one of the reasons we'd be called back into a special session is to address this systemic issue that we need to take care of.
And speaking of divided government, one of the things that seems to happen whenever an incident happens in the way our world is these days is that these events have become politicized. Do you see common ground? Do you think that you can get together with your colleagues on the Republican side to come up with some good solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are things that we will be able to get done in a divided government that we agree on. As I mentioned, some of these things aren't new or coming just out of the Justice for George Floyd, but they are coming out of stakeholder groups, kind of a broad spectrum of people, Republican and Democrat agreeing. Our House Public Safety bill this year was really worked on by a number of stakeholders that had some of these on there, some of these pieces on there already. So I do believe there is common ground. I think there's some of us that would like it to go further, and that may not be the case this session in a divided government, but I do think we could get something done, and I'm hopeful we do get something done.
All right. Well, Representative Liz Olson, DFL Duluth, the House Majority Whip, thank you very much and good luck going forward.
Thank you so much, Greg.
With so much to keep up on, you can count on Almanac North for in-depth discussion of the issues important to all of us. And you can follow us on our social media sites if you happen to miss a show. You will find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. and visit the WDSC website for program updates, upcoming events, and more information about special programming here at the station. And speaking of special programming, WDSC is planning a series of programs on systemic racism. Our goal here is to become part of the community dialogue on this long-standing evil and help facilitate understanding and change. Watch for more information on that special programming in the coming weeks. Duluth's Anger Tower. It's lit with golden light, lit since last Friday, to symbolize a candle in memory of George Floyd. We say thanks to our guests and the crew here in the studio this evening. I'm Dennis Anderson. Stay healthy, have a great weekend, everybody, and be kind.